high visibility roles where it's where what I'm describing is particularly bad, like acting, Hollywood, the music industry, politics, high achievement roles where these sort of nasty racist games are played. But I think that by now they're played, and they've been shown to be played pretty much everywhere. I mean, I hear all the time from parents and from kids about this, that, they're caught up in this, whether it's seeing other people promoted unfairly because of some characteristic that they don't have, or, that these things are now felt across the economy.
For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. Hello, Douglas Murray. Thank you for joining me.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Laurence. How good to see you.
You too. Now listen, the last time I was reading words written by Douglas Murray, it was The Madness of Crowds, and it was pre my own cancellation, which you cover very much in this book. And I remember thinking how wonderfully sort of offbeat and off the cuff and sort of mellifluously detached you were as you were writing it, and you were talking about trains coming into stations and society coming into a sense of harmony, and then it all going to hell. So we're 2 years or 3 years on, 4 years on, 3 years on from The Madness of Crowds, and I was struck when I began reading, and actually all the way through The War on the West, I was struck by you maintained this sense of it's fine, nothing touches me, but it made me very angry, actually. A lot of the stuff, certainly to do with the anti-white racism, which you point out, which other people seem to be terrified of pointing out. I was wondering whether there was an anger in you about this, about what's happening in terms of the race issue.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's as you say, Laurence. I mean, as a writer, you have to keep a certain detachment, because there's nothing worse for a reader than to feel like an author is sort of, poking them in the chest constantly for hours. I mean, it wouldn't be a very pleasant reading experience. So I mean, there's an inevitable detachment you have to have when you're talking about an issue this deep and this serious. But of course, as I think the reader can tell, I have my own simmering anger about some of the things I'm writing about, and you can't turn it up to full throttle throughout a book. You can turn it up to full throttle at parts, which is what I think I do. But yes, I mean, all of the things I'm describing in The War on the West, I mean, are enraging to me, as I think they almost certainly are to a majority of the public. It's a horrible thing to see everything in your culture that you love being put through the same ringer of tedious, rebarbative, vengeful, sort of monomaniacal political hectoring, as we've seen in recent years. And absolutely everything from our history to our culture, every single aspect of the culture, from football games to, Shakespeare's Globe, you just guess what politics you're going to be offered whenever you leave the house. That absolutely enrages me, because I think it's simplistic. I think it's reductive. I think it's very, very harmful. And I don't think there's any form of politics or activism that I would want shoved down my throat every time I left the house. I don't think there is. But this maniacal obsession with, race, slavery, empire, the sins of the past and sins of the present, this is so damaging. And of course it is enormously anger causing, because first of all, as I say in the book, it is deeply unfair. I mean, it's deeply unfair to our past. And I also think, and we'll come on to this, that it's deeply unfair to us in the present. I don't think that there is any group of people who would put up with being told forever that they are, by dint of their skin color, just awful. I mean, I think it's sort of obvious, and if it's not obvious, I state it now, but I've stated in the past, not least in the madness of crowds. It seems to me that race should be like sex and sexuality, something which is sort of as uninteresting really about a person as hair color. If they have a competency to achieve something, then they should be allowed to achieve it, whatever their race or sex or sexuality. That seems sort of obvious to me, and the aspiration we were getting to. And then in recent years, as I say, in the madness of crowds, the trains seem to be pulling into some kind of station, and then got this head of steam, went shooting off again. And what I describe in The War in the West is really one of the things that's now happened from that shooting out of the station again, that not only our past is being torn up, but that people in the present are being invited to live their lives as guilty, sort of appalling people who should sidle through life without causing any harm and then sidle off. And that of course is enraging. To say that to any group of people would be maddening, but to say it to the majority is just tactically as well as morally just mad.
And it doesn't seem to serve any benefit for anybody. So I was sitting there looking at Will Smith at the Oscars the other day, and this idea that we're being told words of violence, which is a terrible, ridiculous idea on its own, and then Will Smith stands up at the Oscars and quite rightly in many people's eyes goes, I'm defending my partner and I'm going to give someone a slap, but then the ensuing standing ovation and then the sort of mealy-mouthed vague cancellation of I'm not going to be in this next movie makes me think, as you say in the book, and as you point out, this unrelenting inconsistency of this ideology is that there therefore seems to be a sort of privilege inferred on people who happen to have black skin, that they can behave in a certain way that so it doesn't seem to benefit anybody in society.
No,
the hyper-racialization of it.
I'll never be able to get over the sheer joy of watching Hollywood that always tells us that love is love. Empathy is the answer. Sitting there when someone assaults somebody else on the stage and giving that person a standing ovation 15 minutes later, I think it's an encapsulation of the fakeness that exists in Hollywood and part of the wider culture. As you say, this sort of words of violence, and violence happens, and we say love. What was it that Will Smith said? I want to be a channel for love or something.
That sounds like he's seen a therapist. But I quite like Denzel Washington on these things. I liked what Denzel Washington did because he sort of wanted to bring in a faith or a spiritual aspect to it, which was to turn around and say, when the devil is near you, you need to watch out, and when the devil isn't, he ignores you. So it feels to me that we have, whether you believe in God or not, it feels to me like that there is a malign and demonic force around us, and that force is actually very happy to sort of stand up and express itself nowadays. And the Will Smith incident, and then the Dave Chappelle incident as well. What's happened now that a performer is incapable. They've managed to suppress free expression so much that a performer is going to be sweating before they walk on stage, especially comedians.
That's right. Absolutely. I feel very sorry for Dave Chappelle. I'm an enormous fan of his, and I think he's obviously one of the 2 or 3 standout comedians of his generation. And I thought watching his last Netflix special, the one that got all the attention last year, I thought that something very curious was happening to him. He seemed, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think he seemed to visibly shocked by the amount of pushback he had got. He was so brilliant and so witty and brave about it, but he was clearly saying, I didn't know what I trod into. I'm going to continue treading through this for a second, and then please leave me alone. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to talk this trans thing anymore. And I thought it was very, very impressive because he showed bravery, but also showed a human side, which was, I've also got to have life, And then after sort of doing that, and sort of saying that, after that, to be assaulted on stage, is the sort of thing, actually, I think any performer would find it quite hard to get over, because you do after that have a sort of feeling of, well, every time I step out, that moment between, life and violence could be eroded again at any moment. No, I just quickly to say one thing about that. You mentioned that your own experience of this and the way it may tinge your reading of a book like The War in the West. I think that's completely understandable because you were put through a particularly unpleasant cycle of this, and as I know from knowing you, what a vicious and lie-filled thing happened to you, and you trod through that in the same way Chappelle and a few others have. You said, okay, you're not going to chase me off the field. You're not going to bully me out of the arena. I will find my own pace and my own drum to march to. It's a subquote Thoreau, and that in itself, of course, is very important because it's very important for those of us watching. You, others who've been through that. It's very important to think, okay, you can survive. You don't have to conform. You don't have to do what you're told. There is actually another way. But that feeling of that having affected everything else going on around you is something to an extent. You had a sort of hyper version of, but I think probably everybody feels to some extent because we have all in recent years been walking through this period where we have had to, on a daily basis, put up with very unfair assaults on things to do with our culture, our history, our nation, which are enraging because they're unfair. And I keep coming back to that word of fairness because for obvious reasons, things like equity and equality don't do it for me anymore. But fairness is important. And I think most people, whatever their political views, we could agree that being fair to people in the present and fair to people in the past is an important aspiration. And if there is a sort of feeling of deep feeling that comes up from reading a book like The War in the West, I think one of them will be, I hope, as with writing it, just an overwhelming feeling that we have been unfair and we've been treating people unfairly, and it's time to make it stop.
Yeah, it was interesting, this idea of fairness, because it crosses the true barriers in culture, which are socioeconomic and class-based. So you can find, a docker in Grimsby would have the same view as an Oxford Don on what fairness is. It yes. crosses all these boundaries. And to sort of invert this idea of race, for example, I was sat there this morning thinking about race, and I cannot help but go back to the trans thing as well, because it's always it's so provocative, and you're watching what's happening with the Supreme Court. I know it's not trans related, but everything's turning into a sort of movement based on this LGBTQIA alphabet thing, as Dave Chappelle says. Do you think that it is now that an Oppression Olympics has been created, that white-skinned people have said, I want a bit of this oppression myself, so therefore I've got to find a part of the grievance culture where I can intersect with? And yes. for example, I wonder how many working class black kids in Leytonstone identify as trans, for example, whereas a huge number of upper middle class liberals in my son's school have long hair and call themselves girls' names. Is there something about the flip side of the race issue, which is where white people have decided that they need to play a part too? Oh yeah, I think so. I sort of hint at that in the Madness of Crowds, but I think it's overwhelmingly the case now that what you can see is, Britain, America are still white majority countries. The countries I'm writing about in The War in the West are white majority countries, and you have this situation where, as I say, referred to earlier, a minority group would not put up with being talked to in the way that white people are in the West now talked about. And, in case there's any uncertainty about that, I'm talking about the pathologization of white people, the weekly invention of new pathologizing terms so that people are, subject to white guilt or
or if they object to it, they express white rage or white fragility or white tears and all of these other things, none of which would be acceptable if we just added the word black in instead of the word white.
Why is that? Why?
Well, it's because you're talking to a majority and there's a perception that the majority in question did something wrong in the past and have to atone for it in the present. The clear thing is, as one of the people I critique in The War on the West says, Ibram X. Kendi, the clear thing of our era is there was past injustice, sure. You'd be a fool to deny it. There was past injustice, and therefore the way to make up for it is present day injustice. You were prejudiced against one group in the past, be prejudiced against another group in the present. And that's
pure racism with racism.
To have done. Exactly. And, actually, it's similar to what I was describing in my last book. In The Madness of Crowds, I described this thing of overcorrection. It's sort of the train analogy was part of that. The overcorrection theory is, let's say we agree that we want to be an equality, and this is equality, and that this is an inequality of some kind. There is a perception that in order to get to that middle, you can't just get there gradually. The literature is called the Gradualist Approach. You can't get there by more and more people of different ethnic backgrounds getting to high attainment positions. You can't do it by women being gradually more and more represented in certain professions. Again, only certain ones. Nobody wants to lay the tarmac because they're a woman. Nobody seeks more road layers for women. But in high profile positions, let's say the aim is to get to equality. There is a clear human tendency at this point to overcorrect and to go to there. So that I know the idea is that then in due course you might come back to equal. In other words, you have to overcorrect to get the correction. And as you know, this happens in pretty much every area of politics. You have people who believe that, for instance, the answer to the undoubted fact that in the past women weren't able to do everything that men were able to do, didn't have the same amount of life choices, means that in the present you should correct it not by a gradual correction of that, which I think we're actually at and have been at for a long time, but you should correct it by saying men are terrible, as if that overcorrection will get you back to there. And
I remember reading the Diversity Delusion, the Heather MacDonald book, and it just so clearly lays out why this is a really bad idea for society.
Yes.
and what the outcomes are. So do you think that the West is, I think you said, I can't remember whether you said it in Stranger to Europe or The Madness of Crowds, that the West is committing suicide. Do you think the West is committing suicide, or do you think the West is being murdered?
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, there are definitely people assaulting us, and we're definitely doing an assault on ourselves. To finish this point about the overcorrection issue, in terms of race, what is clearly happening is that we have agreed that past injustice carried out by white people, as if white people were the only people who carried out injustices in the past, but let's stick on the injustices that are now agreed to be the worst injustices in the world, which is white on black racism and the transatlantic slave trade and British colonialism. In order to make up for these things and any residual hereditary harm, you need to carry out harm on people who look like the descendants of the people who did it. As I said, this is enormously selective. We don't do this as any other group of people. If you or I said we would like to go to North Africa and find the descendants of Barbary pirates who captured about 1.5 million Europeans from the southern shores of Europe and indeed from Britain, who sold them into slavery. If we said we're going to North Africa to find descendants of these people and be racist to them for a bit, you would say, what? How is that going to help anyone? Well, that's what's happening at the moment with white people. There's a perception that you can say and do anything about white people because the white people deserve it. They historically need it, and they should just suck it up. And I think these are all historical and moral catastrophes that we're allowing to go on. We wouldn't allow it with any minority group. Why a majority group would put up with it, I don't know. I do know, but we're going to get onto that. But it's deeply unfair. It's a wild thing to be living through. and the people who are doing it, as I say, they have a very clear aim, which is to cure past injustice by present day injustice. And you and I know that that is an unbelievable mistake. But these are people, as I say in the opening of the book, these are people who talk about justice, but they really mean revenge. And that's what we're seeing. And that's where that sort of suicide self-harm analogy comes in. We're being handed the tools, and the question is whether we want to use them against ourselves endlessly or not. I say obviously not. Obviously not.
Absolutely, it would be an unbelievable detriment to our society to do it. But there are those driven to do it. Is that part of a broader malaise where we become so privileged in our way, as you said, in the book, I'm not going to be able to nip off to Kinshasa and become foreign minister in
yes. Exactly.
Or Bangladesh or China, and the flow of traffic is one way, to the point that where the West is uniquely, as far as ideas are concerned, it absorbs people from different areas and different cultures, and it celebrates them, and it uses the West uses them as through freedom of speech and through equality of opportunity, and through an actual deep and wonderful respect that the West in itself is flawed, as you said in your book. This is the only societal structure which is allowed to criticize itself in this level. So we are actually defending something which is genuinely progressive. We're not defending something which is white. We're defending something which is progressive, and then we can come on later to what the solutions were. But without diagnosing the problem, we're in real trouble, is what I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to understand the position we're at. The position we're at is we are in this period of overcorrection to do with race and perceived historic wrongs. I say perceived because there is an apparent, to steel man rather than straw man, some of the people I'm criticizing. They seem to think, or at least their claim is, that the reason why we need to be in this period of overcorrection is because there are parts of our past that we haven't litigated, basically. That we haven't dealt with, racism, that we haven't dealt with slavery, haven't dealt with colonialism. That seems to be their position now. Is there something in it? Yes, there's always something in it. Could we know more about these things? Yes, obviously. Is it the case that we haven't ever dealt with them? No. I mean, this is the point at which I diverge. No. Britain dealt with slavery more than 200 years ago now. America actually dealt with it 2 centuries ago. Are there residual problems from that in America? I'd say yes, it's possible. It's possible. Does that explain all racial inequities in America in the year 2022? No. Should that misperception be applied to all other countries in the West? Clearly not. But this claim
it's very anti-Western to believe that inequity can't exist, because the entire point of meritocratic society is that if you work, the American dream is based upon it. The harder you work, the more you can achieve. This sudden Marxist, this sort of race Marxism and sexual identification Marxism doesn't seem to be Western even remotely, and yet my son has just come back from school with a thing saying he was about to attend a lecture on white guilt, or white something else, and he's 10. So I mean, this
is a moral disaster. Yeah. What did you do?
I wrote to the school. And I said, "Dear King Alfred," what was it called, the book? The book was called something, it was about sugar. It was something like the what. I wrote to school and I said, "Can you please stop teaching my son this woke bollocks? Because there are 40 million slaves arrived today." Thank you for that information, by the way. There are 40 million slaves alive and working today, many more than there were working during the slave trade. And can you do some research instead of teaching my son to judge someone on the colour of their skin rather than the content of their character? So my concern as a father is that they're never going to escape this stuff.
Right.
It's so entrenched. And are there any cultural institutions, because I know you're very sort of pessimistic about the state of our cultural institutions, which I think we both agree should uphold the society that they were built to represent.
Yes.
Are there any glimpses of institutions that don't like this?
Well, there are. And I mean, one of the things is, of course, everyone's been bullied so badly. I mean, the reason why people did things like what they did to you is because the aim is to correct the movement of the herd. Okay, when you make the mildest but most completely correct comments on Question Time, and this little nasty, vengeful mob of know-nothings came for you, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They were trying to visibly destroy you so that no one else would say the same thing. So that sort of thing we all have of, hang on a minute, wouldn't be sayable. And if you did say so, and this I describe as being like sheep herding. The sheepdog doesn't correct the herd by running into the middle of the herd. The sheepdog makes the herd go in the direction that the herder wants by nipping at the edge of the herd and everyone else seeing and moving. By the way, it's more than a nip, as you know. It can be a complete savaging. But let's put that aside for a second. That's what's going on, and that's, by the way, why people like you surviving that and going through it and visibly succeeding through it is so very important. That's the moment where, to stretch the sheep analogy, that would be as if the sheep who'd just been savaged by the dog turned around and said, "Boy, who gave you the right to do that?" and clobbered him. But there are two things that are important to point out here. The first is the historical idiocy. This is absolutely crucial. The people telling us that we haven't addressed these things seem to me, and I prove this in the book, wildly historically illiterate. I mean, when people say, we haven't contended with the history of colonialism or the history of racism or the history of slavery, as I show in The War in the West, these people just don't know what they're talking about. We've seen the idiotic thing recently of minor members of the royal family going to places and being picketed by people saying that the crown hasn't apologized for slavery. The Queen herself has to apologize. That it has to pay reparations. And this has never been contended with. Bollocks. Britain's anti-slavery laws were signed into law by King George III. And for the people who think we didn't contend with this, that was a long time ago. Prince Albert gave one of the great speeches against slavery in 1840. The people who say we haven't discussed this don't even know the debates that went on in the 1960s in the West. They don't know that anything happened before they were born. And I am simply not willing to allow people who know nothing about my society, know nothing about my cultural civilization, to pop up and say, we have never discussed this. And for me not to have the right to say, absolute nonsense. I'll tell you how often we've discussed it. The problem is you weren't listening. The problem is you didn't listen. The problem is you have no interest in anyone happened until the glorious year me. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, just quickly to cover this thing about that, because we should knock this on the head. This specific thing about the Oppression Olympics, which you mentioned earlier. Maybe white people want to have a part of this. This is absolutely true. There are basically only two ways you can be allowed to join the White Olympics if you are unfortunate enough in the current century to be born a white heterosexual male. The only things you can do to get through this incredibly unfortunate birth defect is to first of all say that you are non-binary or gender fluid or a magical gender person, and grow your hair long and say that your pronouns are what if or whatever. That's one. Another is to say that you're mentally ill. And by the way, I'm not by any means in this or anything else taking the piss out of people who actually, are mentally ill. Mental illness is a terrible, terrible thing. But in our age, it is clearly being weaponized by some people in order to score points in the game of suffering Olympics. The suffering Olympics mean that, as I say, people want a piece of the suffering action, or at least to be perceived as somebody who is not privileged. And if you decide in your era that white people are all privileged, which is absolute nonsense today, and has been complete nonsense historically. And I point out at one point in the war in the West, as you know, I mean, what privilege exactly did you have if you were a labourer in a northern mill town in England in the 19th century? Almost none. Did you have a bit more freedom than a slave? Yes, a bit more. But were you a free and privileged?
Still to this day.
Were you a free and privileged? Were you a free and privileged person? No. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying still to this day. So we, as part of our sort of, fledgling political thing, we travel around northern towns, and they are ghost towns in the main. And you very much don't get a sense that these people are thriving or privileged in any way.
No, and it is so wrong to describe in such terms, let alone to claim that all their ancestors were privileged. I mean, I deeply resent this, and I think for the sake of our ancestors, we need to say this. Actually, most of our ancestors were not living in enormous privilege at all. History was hell for most people, and to pick one group of people and say it was special hell for them, sure. But does that make my ancestors oppressors? No, it doesn't. Does it make me have any residual guilt? No, I don't have any. I shouldn't have any. I don't need to have any. It would be morally ostentatious of me to pretend I did. But just very quickly to hit this on the head, there is undoubtedly this sort of thing of, if you want to have part of the oppression pie, there are only a couple of things you can do now to get it if you are, as I say, unfortunate enough to be born white. I think that this, by the way, heralds something we should put our finger on, which is the fact that in our era, something has changed radically. In our own lifetimes, I think, actually, Laurence. I was certainly brought up to value heroism and bravery. I don't think that's the case anymore. Or at least our definitions of heroism and bravery have wildly changed.
They've inverted.
Yeah. Essentially, bravery now is to be a victim, to claim victimhood and moan. That's what we're meant to say, so brave. Whereas actual bravery is sort of discarded. But my point is that in that situation where heroism and suffering are inverted, and suffering is made into the virtue and heroism is made into a sort of unimportant thing, even a vice on occasions, depending on who does it. Of course, people want a bit of the oppression pie, and I think it's a disaster and. For all sorts of reasons. But yes, that is where you get that situation you described in your son's school, where people want a bit of the non-binary pie or a bit of this and that. And among much else, they want that to stop. But I think it's a manifestation of white people not knowing how else they can do that. And I think there's a very obvious thing, which is a complete switcher, which is to say, as I have stressed before, to say nobody is guilty because of their skin color at birth. Nobody is born into the world with a hereditary racial guilt. It would be vicious and unfair to say that about anyone of any skin color. I would join anyone in deploring that if it was said about people who are black or Indian or anything else. And by the way, just remind ourselves, how sick would that be? Imagine if today we decided to say everybody from the Indian subcontinent is born into some guilt, because here are the things that their ancestors were involved in, and not all of it was pacifism, And if we then imagine if we said everybody born in other parts of the world is guilty of giving yellow fever to Europeans who arrived in their countries,
Is there something in this idea that we're all born equal? That whether one is or is not a Christian, or an ethical Christian, or an atheist Christian, or whatever however they identify religiously nowadays, isn't there something in that very, very simple message that we're all created in the eyes of God? Whether that's a myth passed down to teach us the lessons of not tribalizing and going into groups that attack one another. That the very simple core tenets, and actually possibly possibly one of the reasons why the people that you're seeing stand up, certainly over this madness of the Don't Say Gay bill and the Roe versus Wade leak in America, is that actually they call it the religious right, but actually, it's very simple to turn around and go, no, this is not saying that abortion is now legal or illegal everywhere. It's just referring it back to the democratic process. And is there not this idea of the sovereign individual who is totally... this is why I find any charge of racism against me so weird, is that I just sit there and I go, but I don't care. In the same way as I don't care whether someone is anything. Gay, actually I'd sometimes care if someone is one-legged if I'm in a rush to get a bus. But I don't actually care remotely. And I think for the vast majority of people, they don't care. So this industry where you've got your Kehinde Andrews and stuff going, we need revenge, which I think is what he said, or a revolution.
Yeah, he's completely stated, yeah.
You've got the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, today saying this is a call to arms. They're now coming after the LGBTQ plus AA thing, which is basically a political movement, as far as I can tell. It's got nothing to do with sexuality.
No.
Should we... So this is because I want to get on to the solution, not the solution, the final solution. I want to get on to what you say in the book at the end, right? So, that's the wrong way around. I got a special copy, by the way, of Douglas's book. It came backwards.
Yes, we should point this out now so that somebody doesn't say, oh, Laurence Fox doesn't even know which way to hold a book.
This is the real book. That's the one Daubs wrote. And then Douglas has very kindly sent me this one, which came backwards for some reason. Anyway, I was getting towards the end and I was just going, right, what, I need to know where we're heading. And this is what you say. So I want to draw you out on two things. The first is what I think will possibly end up being the option which you draw out. I'm just going to cut little bits out of it, but this is what you say. We have, it seems to me, only a couple of options. They are options that remain the same today as they have always been. One is to fight and defend our own history along clear but exclusionary lines. I move on. If you do not respect my past, then why should I respect yours? If you do not respect my culture, then why should I respect yours, etc., etc. This way lies an awful amount of pain. It also concludes inevitably in conflict solvable only by force. It is an option much to be avoided. Option one. And then I wanted to draw you out, because that's, as far as I won't tell you what I think, I want to hear what you think. This is what you say, right. Fortunately, there are wiser voices around. One of them is the American writer Thomas Chatterton Williams. In his recent memoir, Self-Portrait in Black and White, Williams writes, one way or another, we are going to have to figure out how to make our multi-ethnic realities work. And one of the great intellectual projects facing us in America and abroad will be to develop a vision of ourselves strong and supple enough, both to acknowledge the lingering importance of inherited group identities, whilst also attenuating rather than reinforcing the extent to which such identities are able to define us. Right. Hit me. Which one's more likely, and what does the second one mean? Because I'm not very clever, so I don't understand.
Well, the first option is, say, towards the conclusion of the book. And by the way, this has already attracted some notice, detractors and others who are deliberately trying to misrepresent what I'm saying. But what I lay out... It's very
clear what you're saying. You're very clearly saying you don't promote the idea of war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some people are quoting a bit of this passage in the conclusion, which is why I'm very glad that you quoted what I say after that. I say that there is a clear instinct that I think everybody who is or white Westerner will have by now, as well as others, but everyone who's a white Westerner will have felt at some point, which is, hang on a minute, this game's rigged. I'm being invited to play at a table where the rules can be changed at any point, and it seems to be rigged against me. And that's a completely correct perception, That's a completely correct perception. People say they want to talk about history. They don't really. They want to attack Western history. They say they want to put things in context. They don't really. They want to wrench them out of context and then hurl them in our faces. So there is a temptation in that situation to say, okay, I call bullshit on this. Not playing. You don't respect me. I won't respect you. You don't respect my past, I won't respect yours. You don't respect my ancestors, why should I pretend to respect yours? And that is a completely natural human instinct at some point, you know. You come for all of my heroes, fine, I'll come for yours, you know. You want to keep saying that Churchill was an evil racist, which I know why you're doing it. You're doing it because you want to demoralize my society and not allow us to have any heroes, you know. Fine, I'll come for some of your people, you know. I'll point out, if you talk about colonial crimes, that the Obar of Benin was a slaver. Wasn't exactly running a beautiful, equitable society. Sure, okay, the conquistadors walked into the Americas. They didn't exactly arrive into a land of milk and honey. They arrived into a place where thousands and thousands of children were being sacrificed all the time. So fine, you come for my ancestors for being conquistadors, and I'll come to yours for being child murderers. You know, we could do that, and there would be plenty of material. I say that way, as you quoted, that way lies a lot of pain, but it is an understandable reaction at this stage. I prefer that second option, which the American writer Thomas Chatterton Williams laid out, which is we need to find some kind of consensus among fair-minded people, and that consensus would look something like this: that again, we live in very diverse societies now in the West, largely in Western Europe as a result of immigration. We live in very diverse societies, and we need to find a way to get along. And that a very bad way of getting along would be to highlight our differences. A much better way is to try to smooth them over. And to make differences as rather than aggravating them, is to make them as small and unimportant as possible. That is, as I said earlier, basically to make skin color, sexuality, sex as unimportant as hair color. And that to do that, you would need to have some kind of alliance between fair-minded, like-minded people from across the political spectrum and across all groups. There is an emergence of such a group, I would say, and I list some of the black writers and today and historically who give some of the answers out from this. But it starts from this position of fairness. You know, you cannot develop trust if one person turns up to the table with a gun, you know. And one of the reasons why trust is very hard to build on what I'm describing in The War in the West and The Way Out is that so many people can whip out a gun at any moment. That, as you know, if you have one person who can claim minority status, they can at any point just take the gun out of the table, out of their pocket, and put it on the table, and you know, they don't even have to fire it. You can just know it's there. You're being told it's there, and are being warned that, you know, at some point I can pull, for instance, the racism card. And just very quickly to return to that, the particular damage that's done by that is, as you know, accusations of racism are accusations that can be leveled easily and refuted incredibly. Impossibly, basically. And you cannot. It was a conversation that Roger Scruton and I had quite a lot towards the end of his life. One of the great awfulnesses of our era is that almost all of the worst charges are impossible to disprove. Since black people can also now be accused of anti-black racism, and they are in the best position to say, "Hang on a moment, I don't think that's quite fair." Actually, they can't disprove it if they're told they've internalized whiteness, for instance. How do you disprove that? You can't. So you can't ever get this off yourself once it's thrown at you. So
they often get the worst. They often get the worst racism leveled at them. Calvin Robinson,
for sure,
being a prime example.
Absolutely. If you're Calvin and you have Calvin Robinson's views, it seems that you can say whatever you like against him in the name of anti-racism. But they reveal so much about themselves in these moments against such people. And yes, it's definitely part of this. But just to finish this point, I think that this then requires actually people of goodwill who are actually fair faith actors to try to unify what we actually are trying to get to and what we want to achieve, and not to allow people to turn up with the gun and put it on the table and say, watch out, if you don't bow down to everything I'm about to say, I can fire one of my cartridges at you, but that second option is difficult. It's difficult compared to the first, because the first is to say, you're playing a game of vengeance on me, fine, I'll play one back against you. You're playing a game of resentment against me, fine, I'll play a game of resentment against you. And the second one says what effectively would happen after that period was over, is to say, in the immortal words of Rodney King, can't we all just get along? And the answer to that is yes, but it's harder. Much harder. And I stress that the so-called anti-racists are making it harder every day. Well,
it's impossible to be my problem with the word anti-racist is that there's an opposite to it. Mm-hmm. That's my problem, which is racist. So that's why I don't enjoy it as a term. I watched Prince William say not racist. I'm not racist, which I think is a good thing. I think you're right because you've been prescient on this, that the humanity has the ability. We must have been through many of these madnesses before. I think probably Elon Musk owning Twitter will probably free it up a bit for people to feel more confident to express themselves without losing. And I think that there are probably some victories around for us. But as the victories mount, essentially what you're proposing is an intellectual cheersing of pint glasses, so that if I've got poison in my glass, it'll go into your glass. It's coming together, which I think is most important. But at the moment, all I see is the more we propose a rational, fair, as you say, good faith actor discussion about this, the more rat in a corner these people behave. And
but we just have to. Sorry, you're not. You should finish that thought.
What?
You should finish that thought.
What? Hang on, rat in the corner. The more vehement and vicious they become. To the point where, I can sit in a courtroom as I'm doing at the moment, having tried my philosophical rhetorical argument against somebody calling me a racist by calling them a paedophile before, and the legal system is sitting there going, words have a single meaning. Their chronology and context just no longer exists. That's the argument of the opposing side. So as you say, it's a very difficult thing to disprove, and yet our society is ready and old enough to take the charge of something like racism extremely seriously. It's sort of like cowardice used to be back in the day. It's the 4 white feathers. It still means a great deal to us. Society hasn't quite caught up with it. So I wonder, I'm hopeful that you're right, but I'm nervous that, once you start, we have a cost of living crisis, all post-pandemic and all this stuff. Once you start telling white people that they're still privileged and they can't pay their electricity bills, that you may find that people are less willing to sit down at a table than they are to come out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, let's not pretend that this is by any means that this is a purely theoretical exercise, as you say. I mean, this is something that affects people's lives all the time now. I suspect, and it'll be good to hear from viewers if they agree with this, but I suspect at this stage, very few people have not come across versions in their careers of what you came across in yours.
Yeah.
In other words, it's true that there are sort of high, I almost said high equity, sort of high visibility roles where it's where what I'm describing is particularly bad, like acting, Hollywood, the music industry, politics, high achievement roles where these sort of nasty racist games are played. But I think that by now they're played, and they've been shown to be played pretty much everywhere. I mean, I hear all the time from parents and from kids about this, that, they're caught up in this, whether it's seeing other people promoted unfairly because of some characteristic that they don't have, or, that these things are now felt across the economy.
So the overcorrection is beginning to recorrect itself, one thinks.
Well, no. I'm saying that we might be at peak overcorrection in that,
right.
This is happening in everyone's workplace. I mean, it's, that it's not just the high profile privilege card. It's at every level of it. It's polluted the whole society. So everyone knows what we're talking about now, where a few years ago this might have been a sort of slightly academic, exercise. Everybody knows what we're talking about now. And
very much thanks to you, actually, in a lot of ways. I remember you said that very early on. You said all people need to be is brave. And stand up and say something. Can I do a massive non sequitur? Do you mind?
Oh, sure.
Why did you stay out of the COVID stuff in terms of authoritarian behaviour and, do the Chinese owe us reparations? Like, was there did you particularly choose to do that, or were you halfway through writing the book and there was no space to do the chapter, or why did you not involve yourself?
Several things. One is I did eventually, but I definitely ducked out in the beginning. Well, I mean, there are several reasons. One is I'm very, very wary about speaking about things I don't know about. I'm very wary about it. And sometimes people say, I don't understand why you don't talk about COVID more. I don't understand why you don't talk about pandemics. I'm afraid my simple answer is, because until 2020, I had never thought about pandemics in any depth. I had never spent any time researching them. I had never read one book about pandemics. And this isn't an argument that you have to be an expert to have any views, but certainly from the start, I was not going to throw myself in and announce what I thought governments should do about something I hadn't thought about.
No, and your position in the book, the way that you qualify stuff in the book would reaffirms that, because you make a position, then you provide evidence, and it's impossible to come out with any evidence about COVID at the moment because we just haven't been around for long enough. I just wonder whether you think that that is something that we should be. I wonder whether in your next book there will be an interlude that says COVID, or because it feels to me like a major authoritarian, authoritarian overreach.
I agree. I mean, in the end, it's slightly weird. I sometimes get feedback like, "You never said anything about this," and I say, I have written about it. I did by the time of the second lockdown. I said in print and in interviews that I thought that another lockdown was a big mistake. I was no way up for it. So and within the first 12 months of COVID, and again, lots of people who are anonymous online will say, "Wow, how brave of you to say something within 12 months." Again, if you have any public profile, if you like people to pay any attention to what you say, you should not actually just throw stuff off, and just announce things that you're now expert in. You actually have to build up expertise and reputation, and you do so by knowing what you're talking about. And so when people say, "I can't believe you didn't say this earlier," that's one of my responses. But within the first 12 months of COVID, I can't remember exactly when, I wrote a piece in The Spectator, my column there, saying, China owes us reparations for this. They've crashed the global economy, and they owe us money. By the way, all of the Chinese media went bananas over this and attacked me for this mad imperialist gun dog attitude. But I have actually written about this. I did make my views plain, but I'm simply not willing to sound off on absolutely everything. And there is a tendency in our day for people, as you know, to switch from being COVID experts and pandemic experts to Afghan withdrawal experts to Ukraine, Russia war experts to back to COVID experts onto new thing experts.
Weirdly, I was the only one. I'm really sort of reticent about stuff like Ukraine. I'm a bit like, well, there's got to be. Let me just work out what's going on here.
Right.
The minute they mentioned COVID, I just went bollocks, And I naturally, it was just an instinct. So I was just like, it's bollocks. But over Russia, I think you're right. People have this tendency to grab at stuff. And I think this is why novels, I was talking to someone who listened to the audiobook of and saying, oh, it's brilliant. And they were talking about the bits that they liked about the war in the West. And they were different bits to the bits I liked. And it's because there's a very different relationship between something you read off a page, something you hear in your ears, or something you watch on a screen. And yes. I think this is why the fact that you've managed to chronicle this mad period, because we are going through a mad period, is of benefit to us all. I wasn't asking you as a criticism. I was just saying.
No. It's a very important thing to raise because you're quite right to raise it. It comes up, but if anyone thinks I just ducked it, therefore I'm an intellectual coward, I would have to, defend myself. But my own view is that there are things I know about and I write about, and I have the readership I have, and so because I weigh my words carefully, and I don't just throw stuff out there, and the war in the West is a specific reflection, and my biggest to date on what I think is one of the big underlying things that's going on in our time, which is war in our past. And by the way, I should stress that there is a very, very important reason why people need to be concerned about this. And it goes, we are, and you referred to several of them in this discussion, but we are going through a period where we don't actually know what the next enormously divisive thing that could come down on us is. I mean, I've given the example before that, if you look at the last few years and you look at the number of things we've been through, from COVID to BLM to the masks to vaccines to mandates to this to foreign policy to domestic policy, how many people are in exactly the same place at this point? Even people we thought we had everything in agreement with before 2020. The answer is relatively few, very few actually. And and there are two things you can do with this. One is to say everybody who has not ended up in exactly the same place as me on every issue is an enemy and a coward and a fraud. The other is to say that's not sustainable. We actually have to embody a different value. And that value is not how can we find every imaginable difference and then war on each other because of them, but how do we try to get along? How do we try to repair some things in our society? And one of the most obvious things is you repair things by agreeing on things. Now, what do I mean by that? By simply that, and let me just explain by way of tangent. Since I was writing the book, I spoke to a number of people who've identified that certain things go deeper than I first thought. Let me give you two examples. The first is the example I give about gratitude being the answer to resentment. A number of people who've read the book have already come to me and said, have you ever been to, Alcoholics Anonymous or Drug Addicts Anonymous? And I thought it was a very personal question. And I know, and I haven't, but I was told by these people, well, that's very interesting, because one of the things that I was told when I was in recovery was list the things you're grateful for. Now that struck me as a very, very interesting thing. I remembered actually a friend telling me something some years ago. It's been very moving to hear from people who've actually had to turn their lives around. That this has been a practical piece of advice they've been given. Why do I mention this? Because there's a second thing as well, which is on a deeper and more practical level than I necessarily realized when I was writing. I say we find one thing we agree on and work from there. And several people have said, actually marriage guidance and marriage counseling and couples therapy relies on such things. If you're to knit a couple together who've fallen out, although sometimes it's just impossible, if it is possible, one of the things that therapists and others do is to say, find some things we agree on and let's work from there. Now, at a societal level, that's one of the things I'm urging us to do in the war on the West, is to say, let's find some things. Christian. Well, I said, or a marriage counselor, or an alcoholic, or something like that. But the point is that because we agree on so little in the present, we should perhaps instead say, why don't we agree on some things in the past? Or, to put it another way, why don't we agree on aspects of our past? For instance, is somebody of any use to you or me if they say there's nothing good in your past or your history? I'd say no. I don't really know what to do with those people other than to ignore them, bat them away when they come along, and just, wish them a happier life. But if somebody says, we don't agree on everything, Douglas, but I agree that, Britain has been a great force for good in the world, and gosh, we've produced some remarkable things and remarkable people. And I mean, anybody of any background or any political leaning who starts from that position, who says, look, America hasn't done everything right by any means, but gosh, I'm glad that the Chinese Communist Party isn't the dominant country in the world.
It's how you wheedle out intention. It's how you wheedle out whether someone has an intention to make society a better and more equitable place. And you genuinely care about diversity of opinion and equality of opportunity. And including people with different voices into a conversation instead of this disgusting, imposed, concrete made, ridiculously constructed diversity, equity and inclusion agenda. What you're asking for is, would you like to talk to me? If you would like to talk to me, I'd like to talk to you. And if we can talk together, you're essentially asking society to rebuild itself as a family with a set of values and the simplest value of all being fairness. And I think that's quite a biblical message. I think you may be about to grow a long beard and move to Bethlehem.
Well, I mean, that's possible. I mean, I'm always looking for the next book. I grew a big beard and moved to Bethlehem would be a great subtitle. No, I am. But actually, on a serious note, of course, as you know, Laurence, actually, if what I'm saying has a Christian subtext, and I think it does, that's not an accident, because I do think that there are Christian values which we have been losing, which actually are worth retaining. And that one you mentioned of equality before the eyes of God is a very good example. One of the struggles of our era, and I've said this before, but one of the struggles of our era is clearly that we are trying to inculcate the Christian ethic of equality in the eyes of God in a secular context. And I'm not sure it can be done. Because if you just say equality, it doesn't do it, because equality on its own without in the eyes of God throws up the question of, but people don't seem to be equal in their achievements, attainments, capabilities, or anything else. And how do you judge who is better or worse? And my answer to that is, broadly speaking, you agree that there are two levels of what we mean by equality. There is, yes, we are all equal in a spiritual, in a godlike, in a theological sense. But that doesn't mean that we are equal in what we're going to do or achieve or be able to achieve in the world. And we're struggling with that. And as I say, let's try to focus on the things that could unite us on this. And the reason why I just desperately want us to get the past into a better context is because I believe that if we do that, we have something to build on going forward. If we won't do that, if we don't agree that the founding fathers may have had flaws, but my God, they did an amazing thing. If we don't agree that Winston Churchill had flaws, but my God, he did an amazing thing. If we don't agree that, sure, Britain had slavery, we also threw off slavery. We also not only threw it off for ourselves, but we policed the world to stop the world in this practicing this vile trade as well. If we don't say, actually, we did good things and we're proud of it and we have a right to be proud of it. If we can't do that, then the rest is just, it doesn't matter. We'll just fall out over everything. And as I say, it might be something else next. It might be instead of a leak from the Supreme Court, it might be a leak from somewhere else. It could be, any moment, any party can go up or down or fall into the hands of bad people and much, much more. All of that can happen. And that'll just be the future forever. It'll be the last 2 years forever. Unless we can do something about getting this thing of our past and our history in a proper perspective. And I think we can.
I think we can too. Do you think it's actually necessary then? So we're getting all deep now, but I'm interested in what you're saying, because you've totally sold me what needs to happen. But do you think it's necessary, because the woke stuff for me is religious? It
of course it's religious.
Marks of a secular religion. That the reason faiths created godheads a way outside of their own brain was because we knew that there was a gap in our own thinking, and that gap was compassion, understanding, agreement on things, that agreeing to disagree and all of those things, and that we needed an outside force to say to us, love thy neighbour, love your enemies, all of these sorts of things. So whether they're actually, I don't know, Jordan Peterson's always very careful about this. I think most smart people are. I'm much more impulsive. Just to say, try and rediscover some meaning beyond yourself. Because if you can discover some meaning beyond yourself, you can have that conversation which you're asking us to have.
Oh, absolutely. And that is at a very deep level, that is one of the reasons why I am instinctively opposed, as well as ideologically opposed at this stage, to the identity madness, is because I think it's entirely me-centered. And I'm not that interested. I'm interested, but I'm not endlessly interested in it, And if somebody says, your main job in life, Douglas, is to understand me. And also, by the way, if they, as I say in the Madness of Crowds, if they also say as a follow-on, and you never can understand me, that's a game I'm not interested in playing, because it's an unwinnable game. But if people say, you have to, I see this all the time with our contemporaries, I should say. People who just whine and whinge, and they say, I found this thing that I haven't been given, and I'm going to tell you all about it. Like, well, we could all do that. We could all do that. Even very, very successful people can do that. We can do it limitlessly, endlessly. It depends on whether or not anyone's interested in hearing. And there's a limit to my interest in hearing that stuff. And I think that it's fundamentally boring. I think it's fundamentally boring.
Well, it's the word I used on Question Time. I said it's boring.
Yes, exactly.
And I think what's more difficult is this idea of you cannot see somebody else's point of view without understanding that they are, as you said, you cannot intersect opinions down to we have to agree on everything. You have to have this concept of what it is to forgive another person for the fact that they don't agree with you.
Yes, I mean? Absolutely. And by the way, part of that, Laurence, is inculcating that in personal behavior. And if I can say so, you have very much done that. I mean, one of the things I was very struck by after that conflagration around you was your persistence in saying to people who were vile against you, let's meet for coffee, let's have a walk, let's talk. And you know better than me, but I mean, it struck me that you were doing something very important in that. And I don't know if everybody who did that, the ones who engaged with you and the ones who didn't, realized what you were doing. But you were saying there's only one way out of this. Why don't we practice it ourselves? Instead of going and telling other people what to do, why don't we try to embody that and incarnate it in our own lives first? And I much admire you for that, and among other things. And I think it's incredibly important that people with a public profile do these things, because the alternatives are people just berating each other and lecturing each other, and then retiring home for the evening. And
as you say at the end of your book, the alternative to that is a very, very, very bad way.
It's a very bad way. And yes, and you, as I say, you and others who said, I don't want to go down that path, are absolutely right in doing so. And but I do worry that, as I say, in some fundamental level, what we're doing is we're missing the bigger picture, and that whether there's an aspect of that which is the God thing, there's an aspect to it which is a practicality thing. And very quickly, if I may, what I mean by that is, for instance, whilst we're talking about the new, I don't know, Black Doctor Who or Black James Bond or whether there's
bound lesbian directors in
whether
film,
there's any future for white couples in adverts, all of these things. Has any of this improved anyone's life actually, other than a few actors? No, I think the answer is no. We're past an issue of visibility.
Watch Backdraft. That beautiful film. I watched it the other day because I wanted to show my kids a film which didn't have CGI in it, where they had to play with real fire. Because, they keep showing me these films and it's all impossible for me to actually engage with because it's so fake. Watch Backdraft. You go in and it never crossed my mind, but almost the entire fire department are black. No one noticed it. Or pointed it out, or said, "Look how diverse our fire department cast are in Backdraft." This obsession, which is why I think, we do have to go back to what you're talking about, which is an A, emotional, and B, intellectual, which is to sit there and say, "I put everything aside to talk to you as an individual." And where can we begin? Where can we plant the seed of agreement? On even tiny things.
Exactly, but my fear is that if we go to this reductive, talk about me, society, if we obsess with high status roles, but don't actually solve any problems on the ground, then there's a vision of what the future looks like there. That's very ugly. I mean, I'm in the States at the moment, and if 10,000 Black Americans were killed last year in gun violence. That's astonishing. Black on black gun violence.
The majority black on black murders. Which takes you onto entirely new things like
almost
families.
All of which, absolutely. And whilst we're talking about, I don't know, Hollywood or news readers or representation in the cabinet or shadow cabinet, these things are going on, and shouldn't that also be? And the answer is, well, yes, but it's like the me conversation. It's so much easier to do. It's so much easier than to talk outside of yourself or to look outside of yourself. It's so much easier for us as a society to talk about some high status things and ignore the world that's going on around us. And I think we need to stop that game and announce that we're getting off it. And as I say, anyone who can show how to do that in their own lives is the beginning of part of the answer.
Well, I think you're doing it I think what you're doing, and why I've always been such a huge fan of yours, is that you present a problem which no one else is willing or has the courage to discuss, and then you provide evidence for it, and you provide people with tools, and as you just explained really articulately and brilliantly towards the end, tools to maybe find our way out of the dark. And for that, huge admirer of yours.
Well, that's very kind, Laurence. I mean, my aim is to arm my readers with not just arguments and facts, but the winning arguments and facts. And I mean, one of the first great pleasure for any writer is to have readers. You can't take it for granted. Not everybody does. And I don't take it for granted at all. But the second thing, apart from actually having readers, that I really am grateful for is the fact that of the number of people I hear from who say to me, there was a woman who just walked up to me yesterday and said this, that, you've given me the tools I need to talk to my kids about some of this and to get them on the right path. And when I hear that sort of thing, I think I'm so glad I'm doing what I'm doing, because when the feedback is you're helping me by doing this, I think good, that's a good day's work.
It's wonderful. And on a smaller level, for all the abuse and horrible stuff I get online, the number of people that walk up to me in the street and have a tear in their eye and
I've seen that with you.
Thank you. So I just want to say to you, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for sending me an early copy so I could read it. And thank you for taking time to talk and for offering us a bit of a glimpse as to what the light might look like.
Well, thank you, Laurence.
All right, dude. Love you.
You too.